a lot of lightning to welcome you to our event today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, I wanted to share with the audience, obviously, why we're here. We're working together towards a tournament that's about 2.5 months long. We have about 220 builders and over 60 projects currently that hopefully will be I'm going to give credit to Oleg about what he said, that Bolt Fun is kind of the elevator for your elevator pitch. And so hopefully this is where you're going to find the builders and projects that are innovating in the space and are pre-seed very early, so that Max can say, be the first yes, and Alyse can learn about the projects too. And Vikash, thank you so much for being here. If you could please just introduce yourselves first, I'd really appreciate it, so the audience knows why we're here, what we're speaking about. Obviously, we want to know what is happening in the space. There was a bear market and things are changing, the price is up, but I would love to see like what brought you into the space. If you could share a little bit about yourself. Alyse, if you can start, that would be great.
Okay, so I'm Alyse Killeen, and I am an investor at Stillmark. Stillmark is a firm that launched in 2019 to back founders and entrepreneurial teams that are building in the Bitcoin space. And we think of ourselves as a generalist fund focused on Bitcoin technology. And so what that means for us is that while we invest in Lightning companies and in second layer infrastructure companies, we also invest in companies that are financializing BTC, the asset, or that are mining software. And so we go really broad. We can be the first check-in, but we can also invest all the way through to growth stages. And so while our focus is pre-seed, seed, and Series A investments, we have also done investing in companies at a later stage. And the way that we like to work with founders is to just roll up our sleeves when that's helpful to accelerate the growth of a company, or for founders to get through a challenging spot or to take advantage of an opportunity. And we also like to continue to follow teams and support them by investing second and third checks. And so the first commitment that we make to you is not the last, and we're here to be helpful. My background is in venture capital. Prior to launching Stillmark, I was working with and investing behind infrastructure and enterprise tech companies, and for over a decade. And so my work and passion is really focused around helping founders accelerate towards the vision that they have for their company and for the ecosystem that they work in. And what's most exciting about Bitcoin for us is that working with founders that will have an influence on culture and what Bitcoin means to a community broader than just Bitcoiners usually. And to work with people that are that ambitious is something really special. So it's exciting and a pleasure to be here today.
They're outsiders and underdogs, right? Completely different mindset. Max.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be back. I know some of you I got to meet last time for the Nostr Hackathon. I don't know how much overlap there is between the Legends of Lightning and Nostr Hackathon, but if you want my full background, you can go and listen to the last talk I did with that. But high level, I started a fund called Hivemind Ventures 2 years ago. And Hivemind's thesis in Fund 1 was very focused on scaling Bitcoin via the Lightning Network. And so that was very focused on Lightning infrastructure. Now, coming into Fund 2, it's much more on the Lightning application phase in my mind. And so, the big areas that I'm interested in there are Nostr, first and foremost, open source AI projects that are integrating Lightning payments throughout, and marketplaces for physical resources delivered digitally, so bandwidth, storage, compute. Those are the things I'm most focused on right now. Obviously, I'm interested though in always hearing new ideas, international payments, all of that. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Bolt Fun. A lot of the best projects in the space have come out of here. So I'm super stoked to see what people come up with today. And also for those of you who don't know, I try and focus on the pre-seed stage. That's kind of my sweet spot. I love being absolute first money in, first yes. I can scale up, typically into the seed rounds as well, but I love going at the very, very beginning.
Vikash, welcome.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Marina. Great to be here. I'm an investor with Stillmark along with Alyse, and I've been involved in the Bitcoin space full time for the last couple of years. I found out about Bitcoin in 2015, but the past decade of my career has been focused prior to Stillmark on software engineering and ML research. So that's been at early stage companies that then scaled up to growth stage in the health tech space, as well as incubating moonshot research ML projects inside of Alphabet. So that's spanned projects in bioinformatics as well as physics and quantum computing. So just really excited about the Lightning space, how it's progressed over the last couple of years since I've joined. I think that the maturation of dev tools and infrastructure has really created a lot of opportunity for builders in the space to just build, a lot of amazing projects, integrate AI, build sort of remittance solutions, a bunch of interesting things that are found both inside and out of our portfolio. But yeah, just really happy to work hands-on with builders in this space and continue learning more about all the exciting things being built here.
So I know this is a Lightning tournament, but this week there was a lot of debate about whether we oversold Lightning. And I just wanted to give us a second to kind of discuss this, if you had any opinions about what's going on in the space, the debates. There's a lot to go, but I wanted to start with that question if possible. Have we oversold Lightning, and what else are you looking at that potentially could help?
Yeah, I'll start there. I mean, because Lightning has been my primary focus for the last couple of years now. I don't think we've oversold it. I think, there's no such thing as a scaling panacea. And so anyone that thinks everyone in the world is going to scale with their own channel, I mean, maybe if we get some technological breakthroughs, it's possible one day. But I think for a lot of people that have been focused on this space, at least in the short term, the next 5 to 10 years, that probably wasn't the vision. I've always kind of thought of Lightning as, a second layer on top of Bitcoin and potentially other networks as well that can scale and move in and out of Bitcoin. So for example, I think some of the stuff that we've seen with eCash, amphetamines, Cashew, projects like that, super interesting, and the interoperability with Lightning. I think we're seeing people working on new interesting scaling solutions, stuff like roll-ups on Bitcoin, which can also potentially make it easier to open a lot more Lightning channels as well. And then obviously there's, a ton of, work that's being done in real time on non-custodial Lightning channel factories, all of this stuff that can potentially allow Lightning to scale more. But from my point of view, in the absolute worst case scenario, even if Lightning becomes sort of this interoperable network between some of the bigger quote unquote Bitcoin banks or fintechs and some of the other scaling solutions like the eCash solutions, I still think that's a massive success, and that we now have a second layer sort of internet of money that people can use Bitcoin for and sort of cash in and out of whatever. They have always the right of exit to cash in and out of whatever apps and banks they want. So I think that's interesting. Now, I would love, obviously, for this to all scale to 8 billion plus people, 8 trillion plus artificial intelligences non-custodially, and maybe we'll get there. And I'm certainly open to new scaling solutions as well. But from what I'm seeing today, there is nothing else that is production ready and commercially viable to scale Bitcoin yet. Doesn't mean things like ARC and rollups or whatever won't be in the future, but today as an investor, Lightning is definitely what I'm focused on.
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts here. So I think when it comes to just taking a step back and looking at the design space, right, of how to scale a blockchain, it is inherently an extremely difficult engineering problem, right? And since the beginning of this space, we've seen several different solutions, both inside of Bitcoin and outside of Bitcoin, kind of come to fruition, each of which has trade-offs, right? So from the get-go, it was very clear that there is no one panacea to this scaling problem, and every single solution, whether it be sidechains, Lightning, roll-ups, even Plasma, other things that are tried have their pros and cons, right? So this is not something that anybody was necessarily trying to hide, but it necessarily something that is just part of the engineering challenges of scaling a blockchain. Now, in terms of the pros of Lightning, when we compare, right, to other sort of solutions. This idea that you still have a second layer scaling solution that gives you instant settlement is very unique. A truly off-chain solution also mandates that you're not necessarily limited by scale in terms of transactions per second to the limits of block space, even though there are, basically there is block space occupied in channel creation. I think a lot of the challenges in Lightning that are liquidity management, channel management, routing, right, payment reliability, that are not part of rollups, sidechains, right, just by design, those are not necessarily features of other solutions, represent opportunities for companies, including ones that we've invested in, to bring Lightning to enterprise scale. And the big one, when it comes to self-custody, I think that's part of like the big thing. It was very clear from the start that if you do the math on, channels, basically the block space occupied by taking a channel, that, we need more to get everybody a UTXO on Lightning, right? So whether that be rollups, whether that be covenant solutions, this was already very clear. But that, because that is still a constraint, does not make Lightning useful, right? I think there is this notion that people have that custodial Lightning is useless. It's not the same value proposition as self-custody Bitcoin on the main chain. But when you look at the enterprise applications that you can get from this, as far as instant settlement, efficiencies, it's definitely not useless. So I think that just when we talk about overselling Lightning, we kind of have to take a step back and really understand, okay, like start from the point that nothing is perfect, and then really try to understand different solutions and what they get you. I think that people do bring up very good points on the critiques of Lightning, but I think that arriving at extreme conclusions, such as saying Lightning is completely useless, is not something we agree with.
Alyse, would you like to add, or?
So Vikash is right on what he's just outlined. I'd say that, people being angry on Twitter is nothing new, especially in the Bitcoin space. And so while it's good to be challenged and for trade-offs to be acknowledged, and there are good points that are brought up, there's also bad points that are brought up. And I think that what distinguishes really exceptional founders, and we saw some of this in the interaction on Twitter around is Lightning oversold, are folks that can take the feedback and evaluate what is constructive and respond, and then let go of the rest and be not distracted. Because much of this is just sort of, it intentionally even sometimes meant to distract. Some of the people raising issues are quite conflicted, and founders that can build quality products that change culture and that advance the ecosystem and or that grow their company's enterprise value into the billions of dollars are those that remain undistracted by the chaos around them. And Bitcoin has that, just like any other frontier tech that's gaining adoption has. And so, what our job at Stillmark is to do is to be aware of the arguments in the space and to also be critically evaluating the tech on our own so that we can discern what, we should be paying attention to and then what is just signal from noise, basically. And much of what has been bantered about recently is noise.
So we talk about Bitcoiners and Bitcoin builders having a completely different DNA, right, than the way that builders in the traditional tech were, where it was all about aggregation of power and data, right? I wanted to ask you, what did you have to unlearn about venture capital when you joined the Bitcoin space? Instead of learn, I'd like to ask you, what did you have to unlearn about venture capital when you started working in Bitcoin?
Well, I was really lucky in that I started in venture capital in 2012 and found Bitcoin in 2013 through a founder, actually. And, so I was in the fortunate position to be learning the tools of a profession that operates as both a science and an art. and then to apply those tools, which can have a ton of value to founders and to scaling companies, to an emerging field. And to do so in a way where I wasn't hindered by, sort of commitment to things that had driven my prior success, because I was completely a venture capital too. And some of the opportunity that we all have, the people in the audience and the people on the investing side, exist because the old guard that has had success in more traditional fields feels beholden to these classic models, where we have sort of none of that. And because of that, I think that we can approach the space, without being jaded or feeling a need to acknowledge and respect things that used to be true. And there's new things that are true today because Bitcoin exists, and we sort of have fresh eyes to that, while also understanding how venture capital can be used to help founders accelerate growth.
Yeah, I mean, I also kind of had, I guess, the good fortune of being able to form my opinions on Bitcoin sort of separate from dogma around venture capital. So before I became an investor, I was an entrepreneur and operator, whatever that means, first and foremost. And so, I started my first company right out of college in 2012, completely bombed, raised a little bit of money, saw some of the pros and cons of that. Then after that, I joined as the first hire of a company called Bright, which is like Sunrun for Mexico. And we raised, we're YC's first investment in Mexico. We raised from first round, Felicis, Patrick Collison, a lot of the sort of YC guys. And I saw some of the pros and the cons of that. And, on the one hand, it was incredible to take on venture money. Gave us a lot of opportunities. On the other hand, that was a physical company too. So it was extremely hard to scale that. And I saw all of the stresses that come with almost dying, not being able to raise more debt financing, all this stuff. And there were times where I was like, wouldn't it be a lot better and happier if I were just doing more of a cash flow type business? And this seems kind of crazy. So I already had things I loved about venture capital and questions that I had. Then I joined a venture firm in 2019, late 2019, called Version 1 Ventures, which had done a lot of investing, throughout traditional tech. And then when I was there, we did a lot of crypto, all the Ethereum stuff. And that was super interesting to me in that I was already, I'd gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole 2016, 2017. I wouldn't say I was a complete maximalist yet. I was open-minded. I thought Bitcoin was pretty strong, but being at Version 1 was a really interesting opportunity because we met with all the, big name crypto founders. Like we invested in Uniswap pre-token launch and, Open, Nexus Mutual, Super Rare, all of these big Ethereum projects. And, I truly went in there and actually I met Alyse back in those days when I was this time. And every time I would talk to these founders, I'd ask them questions like, do you guys run a full node for ecosystem? As I've said many times before, the answer was exactly goose egg, zero. So I started feeling very skeptical. And then I found people like Alyse and I was like, man, like this point of view that Bitcoin is going to be the foundational layer that she was investing in back in 2019. That just makes so much more sense. And so after failing to get my, firm to kind of come around to that view, I decided to kind of branch off and do my own thing. But it was interesting for me that, I got to sort of evaluate the pros and cons of both venture capital and crypto versus Bitcoin prior to launching my own fund. And obviously I'm still learning all the time, but I think one thing the last several years has taught me is, kill your idols, right? Like coming into this for many years, I had really idolized Sequoia and Union Square Ventures and all of these big funds, and watching them ape into something that I think is like just a dead end has given, at least for me, a lot of confidence that like very few people are really thinking from first principles anyway. So take your shot.
Awesome. So from my perspective, this is actually my first job as a venture capitalist, full time. So my background I'll kind of give a perspective on just my background in research and development and how I've applied that to Bitcoin venture capital. So unlike in sort of, you could say the traditional SaaS or the traditional sort of software world, the underlying technology and protocol that people are building on, the internet relatively it's stable, and it's well understood, the kind of assumptions that people are making, the risks, how it works, the tooling is all very established, right? So that is very different when it comes to something like Bitcoin, even though the developer community, as a design philosophy, is very careful and rigorous with how changes are made to the base layer. There still are basically soft forks that happen every few years. We saw Taproot. You see now discussion of covenants. We see Lightning, right? Even things like Bolt 12. There are fundamental protocol changes that happen that do still shake some ground and change certain assumptions that we make when investing in companies, and also inform sort of design philosophies. So even how I talked about looking at layer 2s evolve, very clear from the start, just from a research and development perspective, that the system design of different layer 2s would ultimately manifest in the kinds of applications that would be built on top. And that kind of trickles up to then how we think about investing in companies, and really matching up the technology with the company. So I think that research and development in this case really directly aligns with creating venture theses. And yeah, there's basically I think that will continue in Bitcoin, Lightning, and even Nostr.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the projects or companies that you fund, and in the past, obviously, right? Are there any mistakes that you've seen that are obvious looking backwards in a way? For example, the way they articulate what the product is, the concept of dilution, and also even just like managing your accounts, and you don't have a bank because you're a Bitcoin company. Are there certain things that projects or builders and new teams coming up should really think about to stay in for the long run? I remember Alyse saying that they are here and they can succeed without us, but we're here to accelerate. And so what are the type of advice or information that you provide for them so they can think 10-year term or think long through a tough market?
I can jump in here. One thing that's very top of mind for me, and this is obviously just my point of view and my bias, but I personally love founders that are extremely frugal. Something that I've realized over time is a lot of winning is just staying in the game as long as you can until you find, obviously there's a time when growth capital makes sense when you've got real product market fit. But I think the last really decade, I've seen a lot of people raising way too much, way before they have real product market fit. And if I look back at investments I've made over the last 5 years or whatever, and I think one common mistake that I have made, or it's not a super frequent mistake, but that I would do differently, is really focusing on founders who can make a tiny seed round stretch like 4 years. And that's not to say, again, not to ramp up when the time is right, but you just don't know what the market holds. No one knows. And I also am increasingly of the belief that we're going to see some major market capitalized companies, like in the tens of billions of dollars, that may have teams with fewer than 10 people. I think that's one of the really cool things with AI tools right now. And so, if I've seen one mistake commonly, it's ramping burn before you're ready to ramp burn. And so I would strongly suggest, if you're especially in the MVP phase, even if you have a little bit of traction, take it very slow. I think one great example of this, one of my portfolio companies that one of the founders I most admire in the world is Keon at Stacker News. That guy, all he does is ship, incredible product all the time. And the man just has, he is the most frugal guy I've ever met as well. And his whole point is, we can scale with 1.5 people. When the time is right, we can always add more fuel to the fire. But, that guy will be here in 10 years, no matter what. And that's something that I wish more people had that perspective.
Okay, so from the recent news, we know that company structure and governance, including board governance, is important. So I don't know, 4 days ago, we saw the OpenAI board decide to remove the lead, the CEO of OpenAI, against without considering the sentiments of the investor group of the capped profit structure, without considering the company's primary client, Microsoft, or the will of the 700 employees that were exposed. This was an example of what can happen when you have an odd structure to an enterprise, and where your board is comprised of folks that might not be aligned, incentivized, or properly experienced to meet the needs of your company, or to provide a perspective that allows them to support the best governance of the company. While this is sort of a flashy example, one of the mistakes that we see founders make is trying to be creative or too cute with the structure of their company and the composition of their board or their cap table even. So when you're taking investment dollars from someone, you're committing to be bothered by them, if that's what the investor so desires, for as long as they are an investor in your company, right? So, investors, it's a normal distribution, right? So maybe half of investors are neutral or good and half are neutral to bad. And the bad investors can get super creative about how they distract founders and their teams, or their boards, or, take away from what the founder wants to do. So it's not fun to think about. It's sort of one of those more, it's a boring topic. Founders don't ever, at the early stage, ever want to focus on it, at least in my experience. But any debt you accumulate there is a liability. And so we see it. We see it in pipeline companies. Unfortunately, if you have a bigger portfolio, you'll also see it in your portfolio. And so my, strong advice or recommendation to the audience and to any founders that are going to take investment capital is to diligence who you're working with, and to ask questions of founders that have worked with them before. We think if founders do that with us, that they're going to want to work with us. I hope they will. I hope, I hope that we will continue to get good reviews. But I think it's important to do that work so you know who you're working with before you commit to them, and especially if you're bringing someone onto your board.
Yeah, I'll come in here with a couple points. I think one is matching up the maturation of technology to the opportunity to build a company. So an example is, even in the earliest days of Lightning, companies that were building Lightning payment processors found it difficult to gain product market fit with that, and that is a direct result of the time it took to maturate for Lightning to mature. Right, and the design of a payment channel network necessarily needing sufficient liquidity nodes, and there being a significant network effect there. So I think really being pragmatic about where the technology is in its maturation, and very clear on the kind of assumptions that you're making about how mature a technology is before making a company is really important, especially in this space where being right on the timing and maturation and stuff like security is table stakes. Another one I'll add here, there's a lot of interesting projects that are creating really new and interesting experiences with Lightning that compete with existing incumbents. We think of Spotify, and they're amazing companies here being built, and amazing builders in this space. And I think that one thing that people assume is that the edge that Lightning confers over existing incumbents, the assumption is that will be enough to basically, take over market share from existing incumbents. I think that we're finding that while Lightning certainly will be a key component, it is not going to be everything in basically taking on these huge incumbents and their huge network effects. So, I think there's a focus on the technological aspect that Lightning is the innovation, but I think that there is a lot more in terms of strategy that has to be applied when we talk about kind of really building and scaling companies that create new experiences that tackle existing incumbents. So yeah, that's basically, I think, two interesting bits that we've learned.
Oh, thank you, Leo. So another question for you guys would be, Max, you talk about Satoshi ranks and market rank and changing how we do search, changing how, Stacker News or Fountain can involve people into the space that are new to Bitcoin. And at least I know in Stillmark, you guys have a product, a company that you have founded that is Pink Frog, that they were not into Bitcoin originally, but they came into Bitcoin. So how are we going to be, I mean, we think every company will be a Bitcoin company. Could you give examples of these new type of companies that are integrating Bitcoin and that you're seeing them succeed and you think that there's great opportunity for others to follow?
Okay, I'll jump in. So first, so I know exactly what you're getting at, but I want to correct something on the Pink Frog side. So well, first of all, unfortunately, we didn't found Pink Frog because we don't have the
Sorry, wrong word.
of the team. So the team is coming from, the last work that they did was they brought Candy Crush from being a game available on the Facebook platform to being a game that was making $2 billion in revenue. So this is a team that really knows how to execute. They are a games and entertainment team that sees the utility of Lightning Network for their user base. So we would think of them, they are a Bitcoin company, but really they're folks that are deeply committed and passionate about providing the best entertainment and gaming experience for their audience, and then using Lightning as a tool to even better that experience. And we want to invest in all sorts of companies doing exactly that. So why we will invest in companies that are deeply and inextricably linked to Bitcoin, like a Lightning Labs or an Amboss Technologies or Voltage. We will also invest in companies that simply are using Bitcoin as a tool. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I thought I would jump in there quickly to at least respond to the Pink Frog piece.
Yeah, I mean, I will also second that. For me, well, first of all, there's a reason that I call my fund Hivemind Ventures, and I've never fully branded as a Bitcoin fund. And the reason for that is I think that Bitcoin is an incredible tool, but it's just a tool. It's just internet native money. And similarly, Lightning Network is just a payments network. It's just an internet native payments network. And so what I've always been interested in, more so than just Bitcoin, I think obviously, my thesis is very much that Bitcoin is energy-backed money. Lightning is the decentralized payment network for that energy-backed money. And now I'm very interested in Nostr as the decentralized network for communications and data. And those things together, though, is what interests me, right? And so my fascination for as long as I can remember, pre-investing, pre-anything, is just trying to understand how evolution works. And I think this is an endlessly fascinating question. It's really the only question in my mind. Where did we come from? How did we evolve? And I think it all comes down to energy, frankly. I think, as I said many times, there's only one currency in the universe, or at least in this dimension, it's kilowatt hours or calories. And once you start having that point of view and you see that the universe tends towards new novelty and new complexity, then to me, the fascinating question is, what is this hive mind that we're building going to look like? It could be a centralized version like China, or it could be what I think we're hopefully building in the Bitcoin, Lightning, and Nostr world, which is a decentralized version. So anyway, so all that to say, when I think about, investing in new companies, I think there's the kind of like often mentioned skeuomorphism idea or whatever. Like, yes, international payments with Lightning, of course it's going to be big when you're going to have instant settlement and free payments globally. Of course, doing micropayments to read articles and tipping, like, of course, like that's going to be interesting. Like, it's a brand new thing. But the really big ideas, the ones that I'm fascinated, where I spend the vast majority of my time, is what comes next. What's actually brand new? Like, what's the second and third order consequences of having a decentralized payment network and a decentralized data network for messaging? And the beauty is no one knows. Like, I spend a lot of my time as an investor or thinker or whatever you want to say, just trying to like give my best guess at what some of those interesting questions might be. And so, but I could be like totally wrong. And like, I would love to. This is what I love when a founder, the thing that I love the most when a founder blows my mind. They're like, oh, you haven't realized that with instant micropayments, this next thing is going to emerge. So for me right now, I mentioned my best guesses and what I'm most excited about are, Bitcoin and Lightning is not happening in a vacuum. Neither is Nostr, right? Like, we have also this like generational, potentially civilizational moment happening in artificial intelligence. Okay, that's super interesting. How are those two things going to link up together? Also, as you think about all of these different variables, changing in real time, you realize, okay, well, we have all these LLMs that are producing all this new information. We're already drowning, to Alyse's point earlier, we're drowning in information. There's very little signal out there. We talk about on Twitter, that's true everywhere. And it's going to get like 1,000 times worse really, really fast. And so, yeah, one of the areas that I'm most interested in is search and discovery around information. I think this is critical if the human race is going to survive. Otherwise, we're going to drown out, and people are going to, not be able to do anything. There's going to be no focus. And so, to your original point, yeah, I'm invested in companies like Stacker News and Fountain and several others who are thinking about this second or third order consequence of, now that we have micropayments and value for value, what does that do for humans' ability to discover information, to coordinate together, and what is that going to look like? If you guys are interested in this topic, if you go to my website, hivemind.vc/writings, I published an essay about a year and a half ago, maybe, called How to Disrupt Google. And this idea of a new search engine is something I'm pretty obsessed with.
Yeah, I'll add in here just on the theme that creating companies in the Lightning space is oftentimes very interdisciplinary, right? So Alyse mentioned Pink Frog being a team, a very high caliber gaming team. So of course, they led Candy Crush and they know gaming, and it's people from that kind of background that then they understand and they see Lightning. They're not Lightning experts per se, but they understand the value proposition of Lightning, and they're able to blend it in a very intriguing way. And I think that sort of theme we're seeing across the board in a number of industries, right? Energy being one, right? So for all the talk that we had earlier about Lightning being oversold, the fact is, if you talk to energy experts about the potential for Lightning and instantly settled energy, it solves very real problems for real stakeholders in the energy industry. The same is true of telecommunications, right? If you can make money move at the speed of energy, money move at the speed of telecommunications problems, this solves a lot of inefficiencies for stakeholders in these value chains, right? The same with energy, right? There was a lot of discussion about, from the proof of stake people, right? The Ethereum people saying that proof of work is inherently bad for the environment. But when the energy experts came in, now they're seeing that actually there's a lot of good that's coming from proof of work. There's grid stabilization happening, right? It's actually being used to facilitate renewable energy. It can actually be good for the environment, right? Be carbon net negative. So I think there's actually something really special about people that are experts in other fields, that they realize the value proposition of Lightning, and they realize how to actually blend it into their fields, like what problems it's specifically solving. So I second this nature of this being a very like entrepreneurship in this field being interdisciplinary at its best.
I actually have exciting news. I'm going to be in Congress, meeting some Congress women and men, talking about Bitcoin and my work in the industry. And I wanted to ask you, potentially, like, how do you approach regulators and government officials when they question the validity or the strength or the risk involved in our sector? Obviously, it's the future money. We understand there's risks. But are there advice that you could give founders in the space? Because, I mean, I've met teams where they're like, we're going to break the banks and we're going to end this. And we do need to change a little bit how we're addressing these conversations. Is there any advice that you give your founders about how to speak to regulators and government officials about the future and make them excited?
That's a good question. I would say that all of our founders are quite busy building what they're building and are looking at how to mitigate the risk presented by a dynamic regulatory environment. Rather than looking at how to grab headlines by being, the top person jumping from regulator office to office. So I think that as a community, it's important to organize around the communication of the core values and opportunities of the technology to work to safeguard the inherent utility, the uniqueness of Bitcoin. So as an example, to safeguard self-custody for BTC, which is something that's unique and special to Bitcoin, being able to be a sovereign bank for yourself. But in terms of where the founders that we spend the most time are focused, it's really on building product, being attentive to their customers, whether that be businesses or individual users, and then keeping an eye out on regulation and how that impacts the value proposition of their product. I think it's just a part of being an early stage founder, right? Is to be able to allocate your resources appropriately and to set priorities accordingly. And for most early stage founders, that's going to mean less time influencing regulators and more time motivating and working with your team and being in dialogue with your user base.
I appreciate the distinction. I think I'm focusing more on education versus influence, because we are still educating our families, right? We're educating the people that have power over how this moves. And so hopefully the word choice would be education versus influence.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things maybe I would just add on that. I mean, I 100% agree with Alyse that, like, for all of us, our founders, like, you know, as a founder, the world is already stacked against you in many ways. Like, you've got a little bit of money and you're going up against the establishment. So, you know, I tend to agree that, like, your efforts are much better focused on just delivering something awesome for your customers, and, like, the regulatory stuff. I mean, it kind of is what it is. But I think 3 things I'll say on that. One, I think every founder, it's their responsibility to at least understand the landscape. And one thing that I would maybe say to the Bitcoin community and the builders is maybe to have a bit more, I don't know, patience, compassion, understanding for people. You know, just because you may think that the nation state is going away, and you may be right on a century-long time horizon, you also still have to live in the real world and understand that while, you know, I think having some humility and understanding, like, you know, some of our more out there visions may not be 100% right, just like nothing is, you know, 100% right or wrong. And even if you are largely right, things take time to transition, and it's rarely a good thing if you go from, you know, 0 to 100 overnight. And like, I tend to be much more in the camp of it's good to have steady progress. You know, too much chaos can lead to good things, but can also lead to bad things. So anyways, I would just say, as a founder, it's your responsibility to understand the full landscape. You know, I have, like most of my founders, if there's questions around, for example, being a money transmitter or something like that, get multiple opinions on it. And at the end of the day, there's no black and white answers on these things. There's always a risk spectrum, but you do your homework and you do the best you can. Second thing I'll say is, if you are an excellent engineer listening to this, you know, the best solution you can build, it's not always possible, but is a technological one, right? And, you know, that's kind of the beauty of Bitcoin. If we had spent, you know, many people did, you know, spend huge portions of their lives advocating for, you know, people like Ron Paul or whatever. And like, that's great. And it got the word out about, you know, banking and issues with central banking, but like, did it do anything? Not really. Bitcoin, a technological solution, and this is kind of the sovereign individual, you know, thesis that as the logic of violence changes through technology, that's like probably the actual long-term answer. And so, you know, this is why, even though I said I think that it's still a big advancement to have Lightning for custodial banks, the long-term solution is non-custodial. Like, if we build that, then, like, you know, the other questions are kind of moot. And then the third thing I'll say is on the education point. I agree with you 100%. I think this is one area where, you know, I think companies can certainly do more, but also we as investors, this is one area where I think Stillmark has done a great job. You know, I know Alyse goes and does a lot of fantastic interviews, and Vikash as well. You know, I try and put out my writings. You know, in 2019, I did a paper with Square and ARC about some of the energy stuff, trying to, like, you know, correct some of those myths. And I've been trying to write a lot about sort of Lightning and my views on open source AI and stuff like that. I think that's one area where we can actually help a little bit, given that we have, frankly, more free time than the entrepreneurs do, and hopefully a little bit more context, you know, to try and at least get the information out there so they can use that. But I'd also love to see, frankly, more of our companies and funds working together. Like, you know, we probably do need more groups putting out information, and some big companies like Square or Block have done some, but there's probably a lot more that can be done. So that's one area that hopefully we can continue to push the ball a little bit.
Got it. Yeah, I agree with all of the points, all of the points above. I don't have too much to add here, other than I'll say that as long as we can basically advance Lightning as a fundamental global technology that generally creates efficiency and moves forward just, you know, society, right? I think that longer term, the regulations will be favored, right? If we create value for stakeholders at companies, we show that Lightning is solving actual problems, right? It is benefiting people, right? I think that this kind of building will give the impression that, okay, this is a fundamental technology and a fundamental efficiency gain here that we have in value transfer over the internet, right? It's not a crypto Ponzi. It's just actually something completely different that's actually adding value. And I think that if we continue on that train, that just longer term, I feel that the regulation will be favorable. I'm hoping that after FTX, after a lot of the crypto unrolling of the last cycle, we can kind of
That did
continue
a lot
to
of
make
damage.
this distinction. Yes, exactly. That on top of the education piece that's happening right now, that we can complement that with companies and products that are adding value there. So
Yeah. Well, to close, I wanted to just see if you had questions for each other, number one, and B, is there anything that you are looking at that nobody else is looking at that you wish people were paying attention to more? That would be really great to see. Like if there's an area in particular, like I remember, Max, you said people are sleeping on LSATs. Is there anything else we're sleeping on that we should be paying attention to?
Well, I guess two things that jump to mind. One is I'm really interested in some of this like incentivized file sharing stuff that's happening right now. And so if there are people that are interested in torrents and similar kinds of protocols for sharing files and storing files, like I said earlier, kind of marketplaces for real world resources delivered digitally. That's something I'm very interested in. Would love to talk to people working on that. Similarly, I continue to be extremely like kind of top priority focused on the open source AI, and then also this like search and discovery idea. So if any of those things resonate with you, for example, I'm really also interested in like what's going to look like when we have a marketplace for L402 type APIs, things like that. That's something I'm looking at a lot right now, and welcome more conversations. I guess as a question for Vikash and Alyse, I guess for Vikash, I know we talked a little bit about this, but what are you most excited about the overlap with Bitcoin and AI? You're actually a real AI expert. And for Alyse, outside of Lightning and mining, I'm curious, what is most exciting to you and alive for you right now?
So we are excited by founders that have a clear perspective and are attentive to feedback. So feedback from their user base. So Marina, you asked the question about what is under attended to or underhyped. And I think that would be, to answer it from a different angle, is gathering information from early adoption of these products and valuing it and being empathetic to early users. So an example of how that can be leveraged to really scale a company, when we saw Bitcoin be adopted in El Salvador and Lightning be used to transact the BTC airdrop that happened concurrent to Bitcoin being accepted as legal tender. We know that what the user base was saying is we really need these payment rails to transact, but we need it to transact in stable value. We don't have a risk appetite for Bitcoin's price fluctuations now because our monthly need to spend pretty precisely matches our monthly cash flow, right? So there's no room for error there. And in response to that user feedback, we got something really beautiful from Lightning Labs, right? Which is Taproot Assets. And the ability for stablecoins to transact on Lightning Network and serve people in emerging markets that don't have the luxury of being able to tolerate Bitcoin's price fluctuation. And so this is one example of many I could offer in being empathetic to early user base and really leveraging the data from your own company, from your own early testing, but also from others to understand what the market wants and building for that. And as Max has said before, anticipating next steps sometimes, but meeting people where they are, at least initially, or accepting the current pain points, I think is something that, wonderful founders do, but it's also something that, maybe is underhyped. And we can always see more attention to that.
Being a more humble Bitcoiner.
being empathetic and knowing that there's a variety of needs that exist, and Bitcoin can meet people where they are. So it's a journey. We don't have to start at 110% Bitcoin. We can start at 50%, and that will help build and prepare people for, a BTC denominated world.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'll add here. So I think that the intersection of AI agents and L402 has been something definitely interesting that has happened there. You kind of rose in 2023, even though the LSAT protocol has been a couple years old. I think that basically people are just now really starting to build on top of it and make more sort of applications. So I think API monetization with L402 is still something relative to other things. I think is underhyped. And I think part of it is getting buy-in from large APIs and stakeholders in larger companies to accept the L402. I think that part of that equation is building better client-side tools, right? So if you convince OpenAI, for example, right, to L402 their endpoints, that part of the decision-making is how easy is it to call that endpoint? Like how many people are going to be calling an L402 endpoint, and are the client tools there? So I think the maturation of a client ecosystem there and L402 is something that's great. I think also in the landscape of crypto, L402 is also something technologically I believe is really only possible right now with Lightning, because I think there's the scaling problem as we've talked about. But also you can only do it with something that's instantly settled, right? Like an API call typically is less than a second. If you have good APIs, it's like couple hundred milliseconds, right? That means that to have something like this, the settlement time needs to be less than or equal to the latency of a call, right? No other chain or transaction really right now gets you there. So I think that communicating L402 as a value prop to developers is something that's intuitive, because every developer knows the HTTP codes, right? So they'll actually understand what you mean when you talk about HTTP 402 without ever understanding anything about Bitcoin or even how Lightning works. They'll sort of natively understand what that's implying. Yeah, something else that we're interested in is zero knowledge, just understanding a little more about zero knowledge cryptography. And not necessarily, when you say zero knowledge, everybody associates it with a blockchain, right? Like zero knowledge rollups. But I'm actually interested in zero knowledge cryptography and its intersection with machine learning, specifically the kind of verifiability you can have about models and model integrity with this cryptography. And on that note, it's something that's accelerated quite a bit in like the last 5 years. Like this, the advancement of zero knowledge in terms of the infrastructure needed to prove and verify these proofs, generate proofs, it's all become really quite efficient over the last 4 or 5 years. So I think that's also something exciting.
Nice. RGB is using zero knowledge, by the way. I just learned that from Federico this morning. And Vikesh, I'd love for you to check out the AI hackathon we did with Replit and with Fedimint. So there's a tournament. You can check out the projects that built on that, if that interests you. And I wanted to just say thank you to the three of you for being here, for giving us an idea about the landscape of what's happening, what you're looking at, some pitfalls, and obviously making us keep building, I hope. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. And we say hi to Oleg, which we missed.
Simple leg. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye.